Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no.
Hope everyone's doing well. So we're actually in Ohio. My mom she got her shoulder replacement today. So I'm going to bail on class and go spend some time with her. But I'm just staying high and reporting in, and that's it.
Okay, well, all right, good to see you guys. Yeah, so glad you can be with your mom. A shoulder, huh?
Yeah, she got a complete replacement this morning. So
Yeah, well, yeah, I
she's doing
guess
good.
that's not, doesn't feel that great. All right, so, well, we're gonna pick it back up where we were. I welcome any of your, thoughts and observations as we go through the materials. I'm gonna close that out. We came down to England. Now, there's some real winners, huh? I suppose that's what they say about us. You guys ever see, that one with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson, Shanghai Nights? Shanghai Noon and Shanghai Nights. These guys are pretty funny. So we got down to England. I did yesterday, I bought some tickets. We're going to go to Ireland in April.
April?
Yeah, about 6 weeks from now, 2 months.
What happened to May 17th?
My son said, oh man, the prices are really a lot higher, so he moved it up about a month.
So we're good, May 16th?
We are. I told him, I said, I can't go, that date is set. Yeah, so, because he was wanting to move it, but I don't know, so yeah, that's set. I wasn't going to move that, so he said, okay, what about if we go in April?
You'll probably like her fancy decorative invitations that we just got completed.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Well, we've got another guy, they were here at the church, little slightly similar kind of thing. He's from Orlando. I don't know if you met him, but Orlando is from Brazil, studied medicine in Costa Rica, is a doctor in Texas now. And so his wife, Reese, was a nurse here. She's from the Philippines. And so, but I did their wedding at Green Mountain
They
Falls.
told me about this guy.
And then, but I think they're in the Philippines right now, and they just did like a wedding with the whole family at that one right now.
I told you dual weddings was common.
All right, so so we're talking about how the Reformation, is spreading throughout Europe. England, the House of Tudor. And do you know that I used to have a 32 two-door sedan? But the way that Ford spelled it was Tudor. They called it a 32 two-door sedan, but Tudor. And Scotland, the House of Stuart, though related by blood, were strongly divided until the 17th century. The 16th century was one of division and conflict in the opening of the century. So 16th century, in the opening of the century, that'd be like 1500, okay? Right at the time when the Reformation was starting to pop up. So early 1500s was a time of great division between England and Scotland. And in the opening of the century, Scotland was more allied with France and England than with Scotland and France, and then England and Spain were more closely allied with each other. To strengthen ties with Spain, Henry VII arranged marriage for his son Arthur to 15-year-old Catherine of Aragon of Spain, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. And that's the ones, of course, that kind of like, allowed Columbus to go out, Ferdinand and Isabella. So Arthur married Catherine. Arthur died 4 months later, which led Henry VII, the dad, to defy English law by getting a papal dispensation that would allow Arthur's brother, Henry VIII, to marry the young widow. The legitimacy of Henry's marriage, Henry VIII, was always being questioned. The problem was made worse by the fact that the two produced no male heir who stayed alive. They had several kids that died. They produced no male heir to the throne, only one daughter whose name was Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary. Although Catherine bore him a number of children, all of them died at an early age except Mary, who was 1516 to 1558. So she was born, right before Luther, kind of came on the scene. Henry VIII first suggested that, let's see. Henry first suggested that his bastard son, Duke of Richmond, be declared heir, but many felt that this action would also require papal intervention, would badly alienate Spain. And then Henry decided to kick his brother out of the royalty and took his title prince away.
Kind of like what King's about to do with his brother, Charles.
Yeah, I'm joking. That didn't actually happen back then, but yeah, that's what I was joking about, yeah. So the man who used to be called Prince, you know who that was, right?
Talking about Will Smith?
No, it was the black musician, Prince.
Prince Rogers Nelson, yes.
Yeah, so then he changed his name and he says, "I'm the artist formerly known as Prince." He was pretty talented.
Very talented.
He was the first opening act when I saw the Stones in 1981 in the LA Coliseum. There was Prince, and then Jay Giles, and then George Thorogood, and then the Stones. But anyhow. So Henry VIII had an illegitimate son, but now he can't do that. Another suggestion was that Mary would marry Duke of Richmond, but this too was dismissed. Henry's decision was to have Rome annul his marriage to Catherine, something Rome often did when politically expedient, and find another queen. Unfortunately, Clement VII didn't want to alienate Charles V. The emperor, or the Pope said, "Nah, I'm good friends with the King of Spain also. And, Spain and the Catholic Church, really tight. So, I don't want to do this." So the Pope says, "I'm not going to grant you an annulment." Thomas Cranmer, a religious advisor to the king, consulted the Catholic universities, and they all agreed that the king's marriage to Catherine was not valid. The ball was now in motion. What's that?
Good enough.
Yeah, it's like, they decided that. The ball was now in motion for England to break with Rome, although Henry was not personally attached to Protestantism, as history showed. Henry was still an Orthodox Catholic. In 1521, now this is coming from a source I've got it quoted here. Henry was still an Orthodox Roman Catholic. In 1521, he had written a tract, The Assertion of the Seven Sacraments Against Luther, receiving a reward from Pope Leo X, the title of Defender of the Faith. We still use that title, huh? Borne by some British monarchs. The marriage was in part motivated by a new flame, so Henry is going to divorce Catherine and then marry Anne. How do you pronounce it? Boleyn? Boleyn? So he marries Anne Boleyn. The marriage is in part motivated by a new flame. Anne Boleyn had recently come to the court. He desired a divorce that he might marry her, that she would present him with a son.
I'm sorry, who's Charles V? I forget.
King of Spain?
He, I think, was maybe the Holy Roman Emperor and King of France. But let's just, Sorry.
Clement did not want to alienate Charles V.
Who was Charles V in the 16th century?
So Catherine must have been-
Charles V, 1500 to 1558, was the Holy Roman Emperor from 1519 to 1556. So he lived from 1500 to 1558. He was the Holy Roman Emperor from 1519 to 1556 and King of Spain.
What was his relation to Catherine?
He was her father.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait. Yeah, he was her father. So the king, that was the daughter of the King of Spain, Catherine of Aragon.
I could see that being a big deal.
And, and then, Charles V, the King of Spain, was, really close to the Catholic Church, Spain Catholic Church. So he ruled a massive, first of its kind global empire from Spain, the Spanish Empire, that included Spain, the Netherlands, Austria, parts of Italy, and the Americas. As a central 16th century figure, he defended Catholicism against the Protestant Reformation, fought the Ottoman Empire, and struggled to maintain European hegemony before abdicating due to exhaustion. Born in Ghent, he inherited the Habsburg, wherever Ghent, G-H-E-N-T, I'm not sure.
It's in Belgium.
Okay. He inherited the Habsburg, Burgundian, and Spanish, Castilian, Aragonese lands, becoming the most powerful ruler in Europe. His rule spanned Europe and the New World, giving him control over vast resources, including silver from the Americas. And so they use the expression, it was an empire on which the sun never set, that, later on got used for Britain. He famously opposed Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms in 1521, attempting to preserve Catholic unity, but was forced to accept the legal division of religion in Germany through the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. He waged constant wars against France, who was King Francis I, for control of Italy, against the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent. Exhausted by constant conflict, he divided his empire in 1555, passing the Spanish lands to his son Philip II, an imperial title to his brother Ferdinand I, before retiring to a Spanish monastery.
What was the fallout after England or Henry did that to his daughter?
To his wife.
Yeah. Well, to Charles' daughter.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that the Spaniards probably were pretty ticked off about it. But, I mean, I think, so to speak, business kind of went on in England. But, yeah, no doubt Spain was pretty ticked off. So when Charles V retired, he actually passed it. I'm making a bad joke, sorry. He passed it on to another man. All right, now here's my joke. It's coming from Sunday mornings, the opening introduction to my message this Sunday morning. You guys have seen The Princess Bride, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Wesley says, well, he didn't actually kill me. The Dread Pirate Roberts took a liking to me, and then when he went to retire, he says, I'm going to let you be the Dread Pirate Roberts. He says, I'm not the real one either. My name is Ryan, and I became the Dread Pirate Roberts when he wanted to retire, and so I'm going to give it to you. Now, all of this is leading up to the message in Ephesians chapter 2, where Paul says, we were born dead in sin. Woo-hoo-hoo, look who so much. As it is, your friend is only mostly dead. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. Do you know that movie, Christine?
I do, yep.
Yeah. So, are we only mostly dead or all dead? Let's see what else. After divorcing Catherine, Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn gave him only a daughter, whom they named Elizabeth. Henry accused Anne of adultery and had her condemned. Later, he married Jane Seymour, who gave him his son Edward. After Jane died, Henry married Anne of Cleves, sister-in-law of the Protestant prince John Frederick of Saxony. Despite Henry's efforts to win the German Lutherans, they would not accept him. Henry divorced Anne of Cleves and beheaded the man who arranged it, and married Catherine Howard, who fell into disgrace and was beheaded. His sixth and last wife was Catherine Parr, a supporter of the Reformation and wife of Henry until his death in 1547.
You like the name Catherine?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Henry's solution. So going back to, when he divorced Catherine of Aragon and wanted to try to make it seem like something legitimate. He said, "Well, you guys won't give me the Catholic Church. You won't give me an annulment. So fine, we'll just start a new church, and I'm going to be the head of it since I'm the king." So he started a new church that he himself would rule, a change that redirected the religion of England. Now that didn't mean that Catholicism disappeared out of England, but they did, really kind of like strip a lot of, lands and churches and so on from the Catholic Church, and they started the Church of England, Anglican Church. So the dominating Catholic era came to an end with the conflict between Henry and Rome, which led to the dissolution of the monasteries and establishment of Protestantism. From the beginning, the Church of England embraced a middle way between Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. The Elizabethan reign marked the consolidation of Protestantism and the publication of something called the Book of Common Prayer and the 39 Articles. Now, that beginning of it, basically, I think we'd kind of place it to be about 1534. What year did the Anglican Church begin? Anglican Church of England officially began in 1534 through the Act of Supremacy. Initiated by Henry VIII, this legislation severed the English Church's ties with the Roman Catholic Church, and the Pope establishing the monarch as the supreme head of the Church in England. While the Protestant Reformation was spreading, the initial break was primarily driven by Henry's need to annul his marriage. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 formally removed the right of all appeals to Rome, cementing the separation. Although established in 1534, the Church's theological shift toward Protestant doctrines continued over the following decades, particularly during the reign of Elizabeth I. While some traditions trace their roots back to Christianity in Britain to the 1st or 6th century, because the gospel did go into England probably even in the 1st century. The Anglican Church just kind of took, the Catholic liturgies and a lot of the kind of rituals and so on, and then it started bringing in, Protestantism, especially like Lutherans' doctrines, because the Reformation broke out in 1517. And, very clearly we can see the impact of Luther on people in England, at that time. So by the time you get to 1534, Protestant doctrines had been floating around. Now, as you look at the next several decades, what happened is that you also had the impact of Calvin and, Calvin's teachings across the European continent, which were really, really big and widespread. And so eventually, as you look at, the formulation of doctrines in the Anglican Church, it was basically just kind of a merging of Catholic background with Calvinistic, Protestantism. Yeah. In the 19th century, and then, it was in, let's see, what year was you had the 39 Articles, and then the Westminster Confession. Drawing a blank here. What year was the Westminster Confession? We talked about this last week. The Westminster Confession. Um, (1647). So that's like, 100 years later. So you kind of had 100 years of kind of development, and then the Westminster Confession kind of became the established doctrines of the Anglican Church. In the 19th century, there was a distinct resurgence of Anglo-Catholicism, spearheaded by the Oxford movement. So that's in the 1800s. In the 20th century, the Church of England had to redefine itself and accept a more quiescent role in national life. 1900s, England is becoming more and more secular. Blame it on the Beatles or the Stones, World War II, well, I mean, two World Wars. I mean, those guys got hammered. World War I, England got, demolished in World War I. And then, you come along 30 years later and you've got another World War where they got demolished. And there's a lot of, generally speaking, by the time you get to the end of World War II, it's like, hey, man, we're tired of, fighting. Let's, go get stoned and listen to the Beatles or something like that. I mean, that's kind of like, what happened is the... So in the 20th century, the Church of England had to redefine itself and accept a more quiescent role in national life. Increasing pluralism and secularism have eroded much of its base, but it still adheres to the doctrinal framework laid down, it says here, in the 16th century, but I would say, in particular, Westminster Confession in the 17th century, 1647. The focus of worship is predominantly Eucharistic, so quite liturgical, revolving around the Eucharist, the English Mass. Although women have been ordained since 1994, the structure of episcopal government has remained unchanged. Now, just recently, they, they ordained, what was it, a homosexual bishop? A queer lady, a lesbian.
Is the Archbishop of Canterbury?
Yeah. And Archbishop of Canterbury? Hmm. My great-great-uncle was the Archbishop of Canterbury, way back. And it doesn't come in my bloodline, but it shows that there was a relative that was. Okay, so some key figures. Sir Thomas More, 1478 to 1535, studied at Oxford, was well trained in Latin, Greek, and French, expressed his views in his Utopia. I wonder if that's what Mamdani's thinking he's doing in New York City. You heard about his new communist grocery store.
Yeah.
Seems to be working as well as the bread lines in Soviet Union, So in this book, Utopia, he set forth the view that all things should be held in common and that there should be freedom of religion. He did not follow his own theories. He was very much opposed to Lutheranism, aiding Henry VIII in writing a book in defense of the seven sacraments against Luther. He also wrote pamphlets against Luther, Tyndale, and Frith. As a judge, he showed himself severe in dealing with heretics who were brought before him. When he refused to acknowledge Henry as head of the church, he was sent to the Tower of London. On July 5th, he ticked off Trump. I mean, he ticked off Henry. On July 15, 1535, he was indicted for treason, but claimed that history supported the claims of the papacy. Although More was sentenced to be hanged, Henry commuted the sentence to be beheading.
Gee, thanks.
Thomas Cranmer, another figure, 1489 to 1556. His academic career was interrupted by Henry VIII's welcome for his proposal that universities be canvassed for their opinion on Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Despite Cranmer's unwillingness to accept office as Archbishop of Canterbury, Henry VIII was insistent. Cranmer was consecrated in 1533 after reading a carefully worded Protestant protestation against papal authority. His concern for removal of abuses and superstition by cautious doctrinal and liturgical change can be seen in his share in the bishop's book, his resistance to the 6 articles, and his, I said 39 articles. it was 6 articles in 1539, which was kind of like a significant kind of like doctrinal statement for the Anglican Church. His support for making the Bible available in English, that would have been under, Tyndale. 1534 was Tyndale. Was very, at least the Old Testament, was very important in opening up new religious perspectives to the common people. His convictions on justification and Eucharistic theology had reached their final form. They were argued in a series of closely reasoned works which ably set out the main themes of Protestant sacramental theology. In more popular form, his contributions to the homilies were influential among the ordinary people, and his 42 articles provided the Church of England with an authoritative and balanced standard of evangelical and Catholic belief. So all of that was Thomas Cranmer. So you got Thomas More. Thomas More. You guys ever see this movie called Saint with Val Kilmer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where the
Oh, yeah, that was good.
like I think he told him, but they would give names to all these students, the kids in this orphanage, So Thomas Cranmer, Thomas Cromwell became one of the king's most important advisors. An outstanding administrator, Cromwell drafted many of the parliamentary laws that created a Church of England that was subject to the crown and free of papal control. He believed powers of the crown and powers of the church should be carefully separated in order to put an end to clerical privileges and to restore the laity to their rightful roles in church government. His support for the publication of an English Bible led to a copy of the Bible being publicly placed in every parish. This in turn led to deep religious changes among the common people for the next century. His convictions about the power of the scriptures to bring lasting reform gave him detachment from doctrinal and liturgical disputes and a concern for unity, which became one of the Church of England's greatest strengths. Edward VI, son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour. Under Edward, the cup of communion was restored to the laity, because they used to say, no, only the priest can, drink from the cup. So under Edward VI, they said, no, everybody can drink from the cup. The clergy were given permission to marry. Images were withdrawn from the churches and permission was given for the printing of the Book of Common Prayer. Bloody Mary. So Edward VI, 1537 to 1553, his older sister, half-sister, was Mary Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She was brought up as a Roman Catholic. When Henry sought a divorce from Catherine, Mary's life was made miserable. Later, when Henry married Anne Boleyn, Mary's circumstances had become worse. So, Anne Boleyn kind of becomes stepmom, only Catherine, if I understand right, I think, okay, now let's see. I wonder if Catherine of Aragon went back to stayed in England? I don't know. I don't remember that. Where did Catherine of Aragon go after Henry VIII divorced her? After her marriage to Henry VIII was annulled in 1533. That's a little ways down the road, huh? Catherine of Aragon was banished from court, stripped of her title as queen, and forced to live in relative isolation, moving between several increasingly modest homes. Her final years were spent at Buckden Towers and finally Kimbleton Castle, where she died in 1536. She was separated from her daughter Mary and forbidden from seeing her. So mom was kicked out, and apparently Mary stayed in the palace, I guess. Henry VIII refused to acknowledge Catherine as queen, instead styling her as, whatever this means, the Dowager Princess of Wales, from her title from her first marriage to Henry's brother Arthur, who died, right? Yeah. Kimbleton Castle, she spent her last months in this location, where she reportedly found healthier than previous accommodations. The spider treatment, she maintained that she was the rightful Queen of England. That's Catherine of Aragon still. Died 1536 and was buried there. All right, so, but Mary, the daughter of Henry and Catherine, apparently still stayed in the palace to some level. But I'd be kind of curious about that one too. I don't know these details. These just work so well.
No, why don't you call Bloody Mary?
Did Mary Tudor continue living in the palace after Henry VIII divorced Catherine of Aragon? No. Mary did not continue living in the main royal palaces. After the 1533 annulment, she was declared illegitimate, demoted to Lady Mary, separated from her mother, and forced into a diminished household, eventually being placed under the authority of her infant half-sister, Elizabeth. So I don't imagine they had good blood for each other. Following the divorce, Mary lost her title princess. Her household was dissolved, her servants were dismissed. She was forbidden from seeing her mother. In December 1533, she was sent to Hatfield House to serve as a lady-in-waiting to the infant Princess Elizabeth, a major demotion intended to humiliate her. Due to her refusal to recognize Anne Boleyn as queen, she spent much of her time in relative isolation. So, she got a rotten deal, I mean, Catherine got a rotten deal. Mary got a rotten deal. So, when she eventually, got power as a queen, she had a lot of bad blood and really hated Protestantism. And, I guess we can see why that was, Yeah, that was a tough one. With Mary's agreement, Gardner set in motion the legal process to try heretics. This is after she came to the throne, I guess. Leading Protestants, Thomas Cranmer, Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, John Hooper, were tried for heresy and burned at the stake. This helped to diminish Mary's popularity. So did the loss of the port of Calais to France during the war against France, in which England was engaged with Spain. Her health deteriorated and she died at St. James Palace. She's a sad figure whose sincerity was never in question, but who was caught between two powerful movements and suffered in the confrontation. And she was succeeded by Elizabeth I, her younger half-sister. Elizabeth, daughter of Henry VIII and Henry's second wife, Anne Boleyn, and half-sister to Mary Tudor, her first major task was to settle the religious controversies raging as a result of her Catholic half-sister, Mary's bloody reign. Elizabeth's own religious feelings appear not to have been strong. Like her father, she appreciated ritual, but unlike many of her subjects, she kind of favored neither Catholicism nor Calvinism, kind of more pragmatic, how are we going to make things, work here. She refused to let the Pope rule her country, which won her papal excommunication in 1570. She also opposed Calvinists, demanding the removal of bishops, which in practice challenged as a hereditary monarchy. Lutheranism had some attractions for her, since by 1558 it was well established and was associated with monarchies like in Germany and civil order. Elizabeth chose for her kingdom a religion that integrated Protestant and Catholic ritual and dogma, but ultimately declared that the monarch was the supreme governor of the church. So let's just see here. What does it say here? During what years did Elizabeth reign as queen in the 16th century? Elizabeth I reigned as Queen of England and Ireland for 44 years during the 16th century into the 17th century, specifically from 1558 until her death in 1603. known as the Elizabethan era. Her reign began after the death of Mary Tudor and concluded with the end of the Tudor dynasty. So she was not. She was basically a friend to Protestantism, but only kind of more at a pragmatic level than like sincere convictions. If you remember when John Knox, the Scottish guy, under Mary, he had to flee to, like Geneva and Frankfurt, and be in exile in Germany and France, Germany and kind of France in that area until Mary was out of the picture. And then when Elizabeth came back in the picture, that's when Knox said, okay, I'm going to go back to Scotland, go to England, and then travel up through. And remember that Elizabeth said, I'm not going to let you pass through my country because, you really trash talk women. And, so he had ticked off Elizabeth too. Thus, episcopacy and diocese in England were retained, and the Protestant Book of Prayer was reprinted. This settlement did not please devout Roman Catholics or many Protestants, especially the growing number of Puritans. But over the years, it won the commitment of the majority of the English people. Elizabeth had no heir, but named James, the son of Mary Stuart and King of Scotland, as heir. He's the one that came to be known as James I, and eventually gave permission for a New English translation called the King James Version. He was fond of English Calvinists and was homosexual. And these English Calvinists came to be known contemptuously as Puritans.
That's interesting. I wonder if the KJV Puritans know that fact.
That he was a homo?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably, I think.
Because they're always saying the King James Version is the only viable version.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen, the eventual evolution of English translations with King James translation, I mean, that was just kind of like reworking over, quite a few generations of English kind of Bibles, but somebody thinks that the King James somehow is like some special pinnacle. It's not. It just happened to become, one that was authorized and popularized. Was James I of England a homosexual? While not defined as such in his own time, modern historians widely consider King James I of England, who was James VI of Scotland, to have been bisexual or homosexual, owing to his well-documented intense romantic relationships with men. He was openly affectionate with male favorites, most notably George Villiers, Duke of Buckingham, and often placed them in his private bedchamber. James had several, notably with Esme Stuart, Robert Carr, and George Villiers. He showered them with titles, land, and affection. His letters to Villiers and others included passionate language, referring to him as my wife, husband, dear dad, and husband, while describing their bond in often erotic terms. Contemporaries such as Sir John Oglander noted the king's wanton behavior and passionate kisses with favorites, leading to widespread, albeit whispered, speculations during his reign. Despite his preferences, James was married to Anne of Denmark, with whom he had 7 children, fulfilling his duties to secure a royal line.
Fulfilling his duties.
While James himself wrote against homosexuality in his earlier theoretical writings, his personal life contradicted this, leading to his famous defense that while King David had his Jonathan, I have my Steenie of Buckingham. Historians now generally agree that while the specific nature of sexual acts is not fully documented, his romantic and emotional life was undeniably included men. All right. Church of England summarized right here. Now, what does this say here? You will meet a tall, dark stranger, then a short, dark stranger, then a medium, fair stranger, then a big, fair stranger, then a small, mousy stranger, and then another small, dark stranger.
All of his wives.
Pokemon. Why did I can't remember why I made this. The basic pattern was set in motion from that time that Reformation began coming into England was the path of ritual and compromise. Henry VIII had seen religion as a tool and used it by a process of compromise. Many of those who worked with him and followed him took the same path. Today, as one looks at the Church of England, we see a church that is not fully Catholic yet bears many marks of Rome. At the same time, if one looks carefully, one can see traces of biblical truth, although most of these traces are effaced by dedication to the ritual of liturgy. Probably really a good way of putting it. Puritanism is a broad movement that spread into many areas of England and Europe. During the time of James the First, what did we say that the reign of James the First was? Or did we? What were the years of James the First of England? Reigned from March 24, 1603 until his death in March 27, 1625. So he had like 22 years. Reigning simultaneously as James the First of England and simultaneously as James the Sixth of Scotland, uniting the crowns. Okay, so during the time of James the First, that's basically first 20-some years of 1600s, James the First in England had English Calvinists were given the name Puritan as a term of contempt because of their constant call for the Church of England to return to biblical religion. I can remember one time, I don't know, like earlier in my Christian faith, you know, and my dad, you know, he said, you Puritan, you know. What does this say here? Look at this. The Puritans enjoy a real good laugh. I don't know if you can see the faces. There was another one I saw, maybe it's in my notes, where, you know, these two guys are in the stocks, and, you know, two Puritans, and one of them says, "What are you in for?" He goes, "Frivolity." The other one says, "Yeah, me too." Here it is. Yeah. 16th and 17th centuries, English Puritans who sought to purify the Church of England from corrupt and unscriptural practices, and later separated from the established church and became hostile to it. Now, you know, this is something that I understand how this works, but, you know, in my Christian, you know, background, you know, I was in, you know, a good Bible church for 8 years in Vegas. Then I went to seminary, and I was at Masters, and for 4 years I was at MacArthur's church. Then I pastored my own church for 10 years, and then came here and been here for 20 years. So, like, I've never been in an environment where, like, I'm surrounded by, you know, a bunch of, you know, bad practices. I don't think, at least, or maybe they are, but I just don't realize it, you know. But, you know, I've never been in that kind of thing where you're in, like, a really kind of a compromising environment, but I have sympathy for people who, you know, have been in those situations, you know. So the Puritans were, and, you know, you didn't have much choice. I mean, the Catholic Church still existed, but the Church of England, it was just, you know, like a lot of compromise at many levels, doctrinal, plus because it was a huge power structure, you had all of the compromises that came from power plays. They attacked as popish, superstitious, anti-Christian, and idolatrous such practice as vestments. Now, obviously, I don't dress, you know, real well, you know, but, you know, when you get these guys, man, they have on, you know, the big vestments. They say things like marriage. Now, surpluses, I'm not quite sure what that is. and rochets or roches. Somebody can tell me maybe. Organs, so an organ, okay, that's a bad thing, you know. That's Catholic. Signs of the cross, ecclesiastical courts, and episcopacy, the whole structure. Before and after the failure of the Commonwealth, many of the Puritans emigrated to other countries, especially the English Puritans to the North American colonies. So the Puritan legacy was mainly an emphasis on practical holiness and keeping the Sabbath. So, there was some, kind of, doctrinal issues where they didn't quite understand, the relationship of the Old Covenant to the church. So, got to keep the Sabbath. And seeing that, did you look something up?
Yeah, the surplice.
Surplice?
Yeah, it's a loose-fitting white ecclesiastical gown with wide sleeves worn over a cassock. Or a cassock.
And the other one, a rochet.
A white ceremonial vestment made of linen or lawn worn by bishops and other church dignitaries. So it resembles the surplice.
Okay. So basically, fancy clothing.
Yeah.
James I ruled until his death in 1624, did not persecute religious people as a rule, with the exception of Anabaptists. Poor guys, man. His son Charles I ruled in the same manner, but he did marry the sister of Louis XIII of France and reintroduce more Catholic influence. William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, 1633, was enamored with the externals of Anglican worship and the need for national religious unity, brought persecutions on the Puritans. What year was it that the Mayflower and those boats came?
1620?
Yeah, 1620. So that's when, those guys, and I forget, how many were on all those boats? Now that would not have been, so that would not have been, I'm thinking here of Columbus in 1492. But let's just see how many came over in 1620.
It's a few hundred, wasn't it?
How many pilgrims came to America from Europe in 1620? In 1620, 102 passengers, known as the Pilgrims, set sail from England on the Mayflower to establish a colony in North America. Took 66 days, landing at Cape Cod, November 1620. The group consisted of English separatists. Now, usually the word Puritan would be if somebody was still identifying as staying in the Church of England and then calling for its purification. The separatists said, you know what, we don't want to be part of the Church of England. And they might basically believe all the same stuff, but Puritan was specifically if somebody was staying in the church. So on that Mayflower, 30 to 37 crew members. Following a harsh winter, only about 50 of the original, how many did I say, 102? Only about 50 survived until the spring of 1621. About half of them died. The vessel departed from England, Plymouth, England on September 6, 1620. All right, so William Laud gained power and he sought to impose Anglican liturgy on England, but the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland reorganized itself and abolished the episcopacy and set itself up on a Presbyterian basis, which helped unite Scottish Calvinists and English Puritans, who also were Calvinists.
So are the Puritans still around in America? Do we have Puritan churches?
I would say
Yeah, probably not. I mean, when you look at, let's say, you go back there to 1600s, okay, so, Jonathan Edwards, let's say, and the Great Awakening was like 1740. So basically, if you get 100 years later, it had become, I think it's a fair statement to say, and I'm not as, really deep on this, but that, New England Christianity had become, in many places, fairly, sometimes sterile, a little bit. And, that's where, somebody like Edwards and, like kind of stirred up, a lot of stuff because it was a big movement. Where was that at? I was in Enfield, Connecticut. I went to Enfield, Connecticut. I used to work for Phoenix Mutual Life. Their corporate office was Hartford, but kind of like the operations office was in Enfield, I got in trouble for evangelizing the vice president's secretary. Nasty letter when I got back to Vegas. She was a cat. She was a Mormon. Okay. But I don't know. Let's see. Try it this way. Let's just ask this question. From 1620 until 1740, how would a conservative Christian describe the Christianity of the next 100 years? I'm trying to look at it from, I guess you have to do that. You have to kind of like tailor when you ask these questions.
Just crashed AI.
Please rephrase the question.
Right. I do not understand.
How would a conservative Christian of the 21st century describe the Christianity in New England of the 1600s? A 21st century conservative Christian would likely describe the 1600s New England Puritanism as a dedicated, Bible-centered, uncompromising yet harsh attempt to build a godly society. They would admire the intense focus on Scripture, theological depth, and covenant theology, while potentially struggling with the lack of religious liberty and theocratic leanings. So you got to understand that when those guys, came over, they were bringing with them the kind of ecclesiology that was, heavily dominant in their background and their eschatology as well. So a lot of those guys at that time, those Puritans, would have been either amillennial, or quite a few of them would have had some kind of post-millennial kind of perspective on Christianity. That, this expanding new world, America, I don't even know if they called it America quite yet, probably not. But the new world, was basically this manifest destiny that God is going to, establish Christianity here in the new world. So it was oftentimes quite post-millennial. Here's a little further on this. It says here, they would see the Puritans as heroes who founded society on Scripture, with the Bible as the absolute guide for laws, work, and community life. The commitment to educating believers to read the Bible would be highly respected. They would align with Puritan desire to create a visible, godly community, viewing them as faithful, separated believers seeking to honor God in a new land, kind of like city on a hill vision. Theological core, they would resonate staunch Calvinist doctrines of human depravity, the need for personal conversion. A modern conservative accustomed to a secularized state would likely criticize the lack of religious tolerance. So, she's a witch, let's go burn her at the stake, or drown her or hang her. That kind of, because that's, of course, I don't know when the Salem witch trials were. Is that 1700s? But yeah, there was, lack of religious tolerance, such as mandatory taxes supporting the Congregational Church and persecution of dissenters. They would likely find the blending of church and state, where only church members could vote, as an overreach, despite admiring the goal of godly culture. They would view the 1600s New Englanders, like we today might look at 1600 New Englanders as serious, highly disciplined in their walk with God, though perhaps too somber or legalistic by modern evangelical standards. Yeah, that's a good question. But so that was like 1600s. Now remember, by the time you get into the 1700s, all right, let's go ahead and ask this question here. This is interesting.
The Salem witch trials were between February 1692 and May 1693.
Yeah, so 1692, 93, yeah. How would a conservative Christian of the 20th century view New England Christianity in the 1700s? A 20th century conservative Christian would likely view the 1700s New England Christianity with high regard for, so it sounds like a lot of the same stuff, while potentially regarding it as overly legalistic or dry before the Great Awakening. They would admire the dedication to Scripture, yet it might find the state-supported congregational church structure. The Great Awakening, roughly 1730s, 1740s, would be seen as crucial positive correction to a period of formal, cold, or dead religion. One of the things that happens, it's kind of like a balancing act, I think, in terms of how it works. You're kind of like walking on the edge of a knife blade. You're striving for godly living. You're striving for, personal holiness. You're striving to see, godliness throughout other people's lives, in your church, in your society. That human, that man, that man-originated effort to get people holy, that can become a real problem real quickly. On the other hand, you could look at the other side and say, hey, it's all grace, it's all God's sovereignty, God is the one that has to do it. Can it become a problem if you just say, hey, let's just let go and let God? It's all grace, Well, that can become a problem. But, if you have a man-centered effort at making your world holy, that's kind of what you end up with. And so, then you start, let's say you start getting laws, about, we're going to outlaw alcohol, we're going to make our society holy by, prohibition. Well, that didn't work too well.
I find it interesting that their idea of religious freedom was not to worship any god or any gods. It was just their way of worshiping the one true God.
Yeah, only what they say. They would say only the Bible. And, like if somebody was, suspicious, let's burn her as a witch, But anyhow, so as you look at, kind of heavy man-centered efforts at controlling, people, that doesn't produce a good result either. And that's kind of what you get in, let's say, the Amish communities, We're going to, go and be separate and be holy. So it ends up being really kind of like an obsession with, your own righteousness.
Did they let outsiders join?
The Amish?
Yeah.
Probably not exactly. Not unless they became part of the community. But I don't know.
I've seen a couple of people on Facebook that went Amish.
Yeah, I don't know. You got any background seeing that? So, all right, so anyhow, you had the, these guys came into England. Many of these Puritan groups saw the Church of England drifting from its Calvinistic elements into liturgism, and Roman traditions at the expense of theology. The desire for freedom of worship led many of these peoples to leave for England and to find religious freedom, leave from England and to find religious freedom in the New World.
The new word. In the new word.
New World, yeah. So here are these two Indian girls. Be nice, but they better not stay long. I'll be nice, but they better not stay long. Charles I had constant friction with Parliament and convoked a body of theologians to advise it on religious matters, and the famous Westminster Assembly that included 121 ministers, 30 laymen, and 8 representatives from Scotland. Here would be the distinctives of Puritans: opposition to idolatrous uses of the cross. Good. Opposition to certain priestly garments. All right. Opposition to the idea of bishops that were above the local church as being Roman Catholic. So, the idea of an Episcopalian in our studies of, ecclesiology and church structure, when we talk about an Episcopalian form of church structure, it's the idea that there's a hierarchy that starts at the top, and let's just say you're talking about Rome, it'd be the Pope, and then, cardinals and bishops, and all the way down to a priest. And so if you want to get any grace, you have to come through that church and through the ecclesiastical structure. And so the term that we use for that is called a sacerdotal, S-A-C-E-R, a sacerdotal kind of structure where grace flows down through this structure. And so you get that in an Episcopalian structure like the Catholic Church. When we look at a structure of church where it's not ruled by people outside of the congregation, but it's ruled by, let's say, a body of elders, then the term that we use for that is a Presbyterian form of structure, that the church is its own structure with its own leadership from a group of elders within the church. And the Greek word for elder is the word presbyteros. So that's Presbyterian form. And then if you look at a church that doesn't have a selected body of leaders in the church, but the congregational governs itself, then we call it a congregational structure. Now, typically, when you look at congregational structures, which, are kind of more American than other parts of the world, we're a democracy, so everybody votes. So, you have church meetings and everybody has an equal say, but that's a congregational structure. And in practice, in most of these congregational structures, you've got maybe a single pastor. They might have a deacon board. And so the deacons end up, being a quasi-elder board. But the pastor has really the authority. The deacons just kind of like do whatever he says. And then the congregation says, no, we're the bosses. So the pastor says, I'm the boss. The deacons say that they're the boss. And then the congregation says, no, we're the boss. And then they all have fights when they come together in church business meetings.
So does the Pope hand out a certain amount of grace every day to his leadership to hand down, to hand down, to hand down?
Yeah. There was a song called Nobody Home on Pink Floyd's The Wall album. And he says, when I'm a good dog, they sometimes throw me a bone in. Okay, opposition to communion taking place on an altar, because we would say, that's not a sacrifice. So it's not an altar, Insistence on a quiet life, insistence on no drunkenness, although they themselves did partake of alcohol in moderation, insistence on a minimum of ease and luxury, insistence on obedience to all Scripture, insistence on the Sabbath, which they said is Sunday, insistence by some on the need for believer baptism, and those people who did came to be called Baptist. The Westminster Confession of Faith is one of the clearest and most important examples of the spirit of Calvinist orthodoxy. That's probably coming from Justo Gonzalez, yeah. That was a, pretty extensive doctrinal statement for the Anglican Church. This detailed document deals with many issues, but in short, it showed the agreement between English Calvinistic orthodoxy and that of Calvinistic orthodoxy as seen in the Synod of Dort.
You haven't commented on the London Baptist Confession.
I don't know if I have anything to say about it. 1589?
1689. About 50 years after the...
I may have something further on. We'll see. I can't remember. So we may come to that.
What are your personal thoughts
I don't have very much thought on it. The little bit that, so honestly, I haven't read it in full. I mean, I've seen a couple statements, but I think it, falls short of being adequate of saying, here's our faith.
Does any confession satisfy you?
Yeah, Mesa Hills Bible Church doctrinal statement. The greatest Puritan.
So what would you say, like the Bible churches, including Mesa, what type of government is it? It's not really a congregation. No,
You mean Mesa?
Yeah.
We're an elder-led church.
Yeah, so it's more of a presbyteral type
Mhm.
of, yeah.
Yeah, I forget when they, maybe back in the 70s or 80s, I think, they formally changed it to an elder-led structure, Presbyterian structure. So before that, now, Mesa, when we started in 1891, we were a Presbyterian from First Presbyterian downtown. It was a church plant. And then there was a series of, like separations and whatever else, but I think it was congregational. I don't know, I guess in the beginning it must have been Presbyterian when it was connected to First Pres. But then it was congregational, I think, and then they adopted an elder kind of structure. Most in America, if you look at Bible churches, all right, this is maybe an interesting question here. Let's just see what it says. What percentage of Bible churches in America would have a Presbyterian form of church structure? While Bible churches typically operate with independent or congregational structures, a very small, specific minority of independent Bible-focused churches may adopt a Presbyterian elder-led structure. So probably quite a few of the Bible churches in America would kind of be a congregational structure. Now, I want to ask the same question about, let's just say, Southern Baptist. Now, it says here, in conclusion, only a tiny fraction of general, quote, Bible churches in America would officially follow a Presbyterian form of government. At least that's what it's saying right here. What percentage of Southern Baptist churches in America would have a Presbyterian form of church structure?
It's like antithetical to
Wow. Based on Baptist polity, it is extremely rare, approaching 0% for Southern Baptist Convention churches to have a Presbyterian structure. Southern Baptist churches operate under a congregational, democratic, and autonomous model, which is fundamentally different from the hierarchical, elder-led structures. So almost. Now, if you were to ask that same question about, let's say, Reformed doctrines, Calvinistic doctrines, a good, probably the majority in the Southern Baptist, which is the largest American Baptist, group, would be, a less than majority would be clearly Reformed Calvinistic as far as their doctrines. But, the Arminianism that you would get in the Southern Baptist denominations is probably kind of a softer form of Arminian theology. It wouldn't be like what you would get in something like, a Methodist church or something like
They
that.
typically are two-pointers. They believe in total depravity and
Eternal security.
Yeah.
Yeah, so typically a lot of those would not believe in unconditional election, and their view of total depravity would kind of be a softened, in my opinion, not really a good definition. Okay, but since we asked that, let's just ask one more thing here. What percentage of American Southern Baptist churches would be considered Calvinistic in their doctrines of salvation?
Probably not many.
Well, okay, what do you guys think?
It depends on what it's,
Okay, approximately 10% of Southern Baptist pastors would identify as five-pointers. Roughly 30%, though roughly 30% of churches or pastors, Southern Baptists, may lean toward Calvinistic soteriology to varying degrees. While roughly 30% of seminary graduates identify as Calvinists, a significant majority of pastors express concern over the impact of Calvinism, with only 1 in 10 fully embracing all 5 points. So, yeah. And now, and it varies by seminary too, because Southern Seminary with Al Mohler is more heavily Calvinistic than either most or all the other Southern Baptist seminaries. All right, so here's a significant figure. Yeah, okay, any questions on some of this stuff? It is kind of interesting to chase some of those things down,
who's your favorite Puritan?
I'm just not really a deep guy on the Puritans. I've read like Richard Baxter, the Reformed pastor. But when you look at these guys, writing back then, it's such a kind of a different world that they are dealing with. So some of the things that they're dealing with in terms of, let's say, in England in the 1600s, you're dealing with, a heavy structure of, the Anglican Church, and a lot of the compromise that was part of just the Anglican Church to begin with. So it's kind of a different world from somebody like me, coming out of, let's say, an independent evangelical background. So you got to remember that, that's where you're looking at some of these guys when they're hammering some kind of issue or doctrine or some kind of practice. We may not be, coming out of that kind of a background where this is the big problem,
Did you ever read Owen's book on spirit or pneumatology?
No.
That big blue book that you have?
Yeah, that one. I haven't read it yet. I'll get to it. Richard Baxter, early Puritan divine, is best known for the book The Reformed Pastor, which he wrote during a 19-year pastorate. The book concentrates on Acts 20:28, developing his philosophy of ministry. Other big names: John Owen, Thomas Brooks, Richard Sibbes, Robert Bolton, Thomas Manton. You have Red Manton, Thomas Goodwin, Grinnell, all adopted this pastoral perspective in the writing of theology. The colorful ministry of William Tennant and his log college in Neshaminy, Pennsylvania, is worthy of note. But honest, ashamed, to say that I'm not too strong on the Puritans. Just haven't been yet able to do it. Most people, when they think of New England Puritans, probably think of their disciplined lifestyle and the depth of their theological thought. Yet the Puritans helped lay the groundwork for modern missionary movement, both by cross-cultural evangelism among the Native American population and by their vision for global missions. So, because they were Calvinists, they believed in the need for personal salvation, the need for the gospel, and there was a big missionary zeal there. Although Puritan missionary concern focused largely on North American Indians, the lesson learned from that encounter and their commitment to the whole counsel of God produced a dawning missionary consciousness with global dimensions. In fact, Puritan missions gave William Carey a workable strategy, an inspirational model, and a conceptual framework for his own missionary endeavors. The writings of John Eliot, David Brainerd, Jonathan Edwards had a profound impact on Carey. In his Enquiry, the Magna Carta of Modern Missions, William Carey mentioned John Eliot by name.
What did Carey do again?
India?
Oh, yeah. Didn't he try like 3 different times to get into India or something like that?
I don't remember.
If he's the guy I'm thinking of, he spent a long time trying to get in there.
Describe William Carey's efforts to bring the gospel to India. William Carey, 1761 to 1834, known as the father of modern missions, revolutionized Christian missions in India through a holistic approach focusing on Bible translation, education, and social reform. So we got to get the Bible into their language, which is huge. Education. Now, okay, so why would education be a big deal?
Well, if you can't read, then
Yeah.
kind of problem.
So, we have, Sonny, you guys weren't here before Simon and Hannah went back to Bangladesh, were you? Yeah, so they've been back in Bangladesh for 2 years now, maybe going on 3. But Simon is from Bangladesh. He's Bangla, and now his wife Hannah is from. Well, she was born in Ecuador, but she grew up here in Colorado Springs, so she's white American. But they've been back for about 2.5 years, and a very big focus of Simon going back to his own native country. And Simon is very, very fluent in English, but they went back and established an educational program called Link Education. And so, a big part of what he has been doing as they've gone back to Bangladesh is to try to be involved in schools and, like say, elementary and high school, and start having schools. And so they've are teaching people how to read, but that also is a really significant way of developing relationships in a Muslim country that's like 98% Muslim. And they have been having some real great fruit even in the last 3 years of being back. And one of the things that Simon has done, so they've got these schools in several cities. They're in Dhaka, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, the capital of Bangladesh. But Simon, even when he was here, and he did his MDiv with us, and we brought him on staff before they went back. He was on staff for a couple of years as associate pastor. But he started an online outreach kind of thing, where Muslims could go online anonymously and begin, studying the Bible. So they're giving away Bibles every month if people will go online and do studies and take like a little quiz. So they do like an online quiz, and then they'll mail them a Bible anonymously. And they've been having, some imams come to faith and convert and get baptized. But especially, for the villages, nobody knows how to read. So start schools where you can teach people. So that's what William Carey, one of the things that he did in India, which would have been, probably, a really, really illiterate country. So Bible translation, education, and then social reform. So this is William Carey operating from Serampore. He translated the Bible into over 30 languages, abolishing social evils like sati. You ever hear what sati is? Yeah, if your husband dies, the widow, she'll go out and she'll burn herself to death. Sati. That's in Hinduism. Yeah. Widow burning. In addition to planting 11 churches, William Carey championed local agricultural improvements, established a botanical garden, used his skills to promote scientific and cultural understanding. So, huge work in India. David Brainerd, 1718, Haddam, Connecticut, was another person from whom Carey received inspiration for missions. He was sober, studious, very concerned about the state of his soul, and death was real to him. His father died when he was 8, his mother at 14. In the Great Awakening of 1739, he was converted and called into ministry, went to Yale to study for ministry. He was a brilliant student, first in his class, but Yale was embarrassed by and opposed to the revivals taking place. Now, when Harvard started out as a seminary, it actually was, pretty decent in the beginning. Now, I might look at the starting of Harvard and say, Yeah, but those guys, had their problem, I mean, let's just say things like eschatology, because of that, heavy Puritan Anglican background, you know, many of those early Puritans, would not have held some of the same views, like somebody today might in Bible Bible church Christianity, premillennial and what have you. But those guys back there, they were biblical conservatives that did believe in, scripture. They believed in salvation, the need for, grace and everything else. Yale, though, in the beginning, Harvard shifted, and it's not anything to speak of at all. Princeton started off, heavy Puritan or, Presbyterian conservative, eventually became, liberal and rotten.
Did you see what the
Yale though was from the very beginning kind of like not that great.
Did you see what the Pentagon did to Harvard recently?
I forget what it was, but I did see it.
They cut off all no military students or soldiers are allowed to attend there for graduate studies.
Good. I say. I don't know. He's got his issues, Trump does, but he just comes down to some of these things and say, all right, you know what? You're out of here. And who's had that kind of guts, What was the deal that, I don't know, like now they've arrested 10,000 people over the past 9 months in Washington, D.C., illegal aliens, murders, and, rapists and all this stuff. 10,000 people they've arrested and, recovered, all kinds of trafficked children and stuff like that. They've recovered 3,400 children who were trafficked in Minnesota. 3,400 kids. But, whatever. So this guy, David Brainerd, went to Yale, but now the same thing happened. So this is 1739. Now, who in England was basically from this same exact time frame?
Wesley.
Huh?
Wesley.
Wesley and Whitfield, yeah. Wesley. So, here's Wesley. Wesley was a passionate, Christian that preached the gospel. And Oxford you know what, man? We don't like all this gospel preaching that you're doing. So we're not going to let you do it here at this, on Oxford. Can't do it in the campus. And so he ended up going out into the open, parks and open squares and marketplaces and preaching. And then, he came into America and started doing it as well. But these guys didn't like, oh man, you're getting carried away with this stuff, A rule stipulated at Yale stipulated that students were forbidden to attend any services in which George Whitfield was preaching. Of the president of Yale, Brainerd remarked, "That man has about as much grace as a chair." Even though he apologized, it got him expelled from Yale in the last semester of his senior year, and he never graduated. Nevertheless, God was at work in his heart. His diary reflects deep prayer life and his deep burden for the lost. In November of the same year, at age 24, he was approved for missionary service to the Indians. Though he was unprepared for life in the wilderness and did not know the Indian language, he went to the wilderness of upstate New York. Later, he went to Pennsylvania, where he was well received by the Indians. After months of meager success, he traveled west to reach Indians along the Susquehanna River. In the summer of 1745, he heard of a group of Indians in southern New Jersey who seemed more open to the gospel than others, so he went there to preach. Both the whites and the Native Americans came to hear him. He baptized 25 converts and started a school. Let me just see. What was the beginning of George Whitfield's life and ministry? George Whitfield, 1714 to 1770, was born to a tavern keeper in Gloucester, England. rose from humble beginnings to become a premier 18th century evangelist after a profound conversion in 1735 at Oxford, where he joined the Wesley Brothers Holy Club. Now, was that was a term of derision that they gave him, to these guys? The Holy Club, So he joined the Holy Club. He began preaching the need for new birth. Known for dramatic open-air sermons, he launched his ministry in 1736 and fueled the Great Awakening in Britain and America. After his father died, the family faced financial hardship, leading him to work in the inn. Attended St. Mary de Crypt School and later Pembroke College at Oxford in 1732 as a servitor, working for wealthier students to pay his tuition. At Oxford, he met John and Charles Wesley, joined their Holy Club, where he adopted intense spiritual disciplines. Conversion, 1735. Following a period of intense fasting and repentance, Whitefield experienced a spiritual new birth around Easter 1735, which became the cornerstone of his theology. He was ordained a deacon in the Church of England in 1736, quickly gained attention for his powerful theatrical preaching. His first sermon was highly successful. He began preaching in London and Bristol. Unlike most clergy, he adopted the role of an itinerant evangelist, focusing on the necessity of personal conversion. Due to many churches closing their pulpits to him, he began preaching in the open fields, notoriously to miners near Bristol, that drew great crowds. 1738, he traveled to America, to Georgia, to support the colony and ministry of the Wesleys. During the trip, he recognized the need for care for local children, which prompted him to plan the Bethesda Orphanage. His return to America in 1739-1740 marked the beginning for his major role in the Great Awakening, touring from New York to Georgia. Yeah. So who are we talking about here?
Starting a Holy Club.
This is still talking about David Brainerd. So this is right at the time of the, basically the first Great Awakening, and there's this guy just going to the natives and having great success. Non-Reformation efforts in Spain. So now we're going to shift gears here. It did not take Luther for the world to know that Rome needed reformation. Kind of like everybody, said, it's like in America, DC's a swamp. Queen Isabella, who was crowned in 1474, and Cardinal Francisco Jimenez de Cisneros were making plans to bring certain kinds of reformation to the church. The focus of Isabella was not on doctrines, but on practices and general decline, such as a continual problem with intrigue and war. So, lots of church politics, untrained clergy, and a decline in monasticism. These efforts led to the printing of many religious books and the founding of the University of Alcala, and publishing in 1520 of the multi-language Bible called the Complutensian Polyglot, with Hebrew, Greek, and Latin in parallel columns. Still, Spain was staunchly Catholic, as evidenced by the Inquisition powers held by Ferdinand and Isabella, as granted by the Pope and headed up by the cruel Dominican Tomas Torquemada. In 1492, all Jews were ordered to convert or leave, with the result that some 200,000 Jews were forced to leave Spain in 1492. Same year that Columbus went out. Basically, they said, well, convert or we're going to kill you, and 200,000 left. Now that's, and I mentioned this before, I didn't, but, in 1290, so this is 1492, but, like in England, I think it was Edward I issued something called the Edict of Expulsion in 1290, and it kicked all the Jews out of England, and they were kicked out of England until 1656. And I think it was Cromwell. Who ended the Edict of Expulsion in England? Oliver Cromwell, not Thomas Cromwell, but Oliver Cromwell, effectively ended the 1290 Edict of Expulsion by allowing Jews to return to England in 1656. And that followed petitions from readers like Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel. Cromwell permitted the resettlement, overturning the 365-year-old ban during the Protectorate era, although it was not formally repealed by Parliament. Yeah, but it's like for 376 years, 365 years, Jews are kicked out of England, Spain, 1492, you're gone. Ukraine, Russia, man, those guys have been hammered, They've paid the price for turning their back on God and breaking the covenant. Okay, so non-Reformation efforts in Spain. These efforts led to the printing of many religious books. Okay, still Spain was staunchly Catholic, and you had that going on. One example, okay, so many Jews were forced to leave Spain. In Germany, so now we come from Spain, talking about like Reformation era, what was happening. Well, in Spain, persecutions. Germany, John Eck was a big theologian, Catholic theologian. He made a German translation in 1537. Well, they just had a Bible translation that was made by Martin Luther, The Greek New Testament, what year was that translated? Did he do that one? (1516) is when you had the printing of Erasmus's Greek New Testament, and then Luther got kidnapped by Frederick of Saxony, the Prince of Saxony, and Frederick took him to his castle at Wartburg from 1521 to 1522, and while he was there, basically kidnapped to save his life from the Catholic Church, that's when Luther translated the Greek New Testament using Erasmus's Greek text. And then the Hebrew Old Testament, I think, was finished in 1534. When was Luther's Old Testament translated from Hebrew to German? Yeah. Martin Luther translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into German incrementally between 1522 and 1534. So New Testament was done in 1522, and then over the next 12 years, they got the Old Testament. So here you are, in 1537 is where you have John Eck making, a different translation under the Catholic Church. Another would be Catholic scholars Robert Bellarmine and Caesar Baronius, who were systematizers of Catholic doctrine, with Bellarmine publishing his great work on the controversies of the Christian faith in 1593. To this day, it's a standard source of Catholic teaching. Catholic Reformation efforts included the reformation of existing monastic orders as well as the founding of new ones. This included the Discalced Carmelites, the Barefoot Carmelites, founded by St. Teresa, who struggled over her fear that demons were the source of her personal visions. What do you think?
Could be.
And the Jesuits, who were founded by Ignatius Loyola, a very powerful anti-Protestant order formed in 1540 that gave strict obedience to the Pope and followed a militaristic path. So the Jesuits were basically kind of like the SS of the Catholic Church is what it was, okay? The KGB of the Catholic Church.
Were they the ones that became like the Knight Templars and all that?
I don't think so.
The Knights Templar were,
It was even earlier, medieval.
yeah.
But the Jesuits were, really, really, basically, again, it's like the SS of the Catholic Church. Its goal was, to squash the Reformation.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and they started, I don't know, like here in America, for example, at one point I was going to go to USF, which is a Jesuit Catholic school in San Francisco. And I decided not to go. I was all set to go, but because they had a really good soccer program. But it was a Jesuit school. I think USC probably was a Jesuit school. The biggest Rome Counter-Reformation effort was the Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563. Luther and others had been calling for a council that could bring change to the church, but the papacy opposed these requests for fear of seeing the council gain power. During the reign of Paul III, Rome saw the need to try and discredit the reformers. And so that's what Trent was about, was to discredit the reformers and try to stop it. Though the council called for reforms, the purpose really was to stop the Protestants. Conflicts, both within and without, caused the council to be suspended a couple times, not completed until 1563. You know, in the Council of Trent, you know, basically, you know, they came down, and if I guess I don't have all these things in. Yeah, I do. Good. Okay. We'll see what some of these things say. So some of the Catholic Counter-Reformation movements included this: bishops must remain in their see. In other words, whatever your, you know, little corner is, you got to stay there. You can't go jumping around. Condemnation of pluralism. You can't have one see here, and you can't have Colorado Springs and Pueblo at the same time. You know, obligations of the clergy, regulations for the use of relics and icons and indulgences, founding of seminaries, the push for a study of Thomas Aquinas materials. Yeah, like that's really going to help you. Acceptance of the Vulgate as the official Bible, the declaration that tradition is equal in authority to Scripture, the declaration that there are 7 sacraments, the declaration that the Mass is a sacrifice and can be offered for the dead. Kind of sounds like Corinthians 15. Whatever was going on back in Corinth. Hey, if there's no resurrection, why do you have people getting baptized for the dead? You know? Which probably was some people saying, oh man, my grandma died, you know, I'm going to go get baptized for her. And there was some bad theology, but that's what people were doing, getting baptized for dead relatives. And Paul said, listen, if there's no resurrection, why are you doing that, you know? We don't exactly know, apart from that statement, what exactly was happening, but that appears to be what it was. The declaration that both forms of communion need not be offered to the people. So just give them the bread, not the cup. The declaration that justification is based on good works done through collaboration between grace and the believer. So you don't get righteousness by simply believing. You get righteousness as a process of doing good works as a Catholic, and your cooperation with God's grace by your good works is developing your righteousness. Now, if you develop that well enough, you'll go to heaven. But nobody does. So you're going to go to purgatory, and you're going to be punished, where you can be punished in purgatory, where you pay for your sins, and after you've paid your sin debt, then you can go to heaven. Now, if you're lucky enough, the church may declare you a saint. And I think, if I understand right, that means that you automatically get sent to heaven. Kind of like, Muslim dying, in jihad. That's your only certain hope, if I understand right. So, and then there's an entire list of anathemas, which is the Greek word that means curse, against all forms of Protestant doctrines of justification. There we are. If anyone says that by faith alone the sinner is justified, so as to mean that nothing else is required to cooperate in order to obtain the grace of justification, let him be anathema. Man, look at these pictures here. That's some pretty nasty stuff, huh? Gee, that'll scare the hell out of you, If anyone says that men are justified either by the imputation of righteousness of Christ alone, or by the remission of sins alone, to the exclusion of the grace and love that is poured forth in the hearts by the Holy Spirit and is inherent in them, or even that the grace by which we are justified is only the favor of God, let him be anathema. So if you believe that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, then go to hell. You're anathema. If anyone says that the righteousness received is not preserved and increased before God by works, but that those works are merely the fruits and signs of justification obtained, but not the cause of its increase, let him be anathema. So if you deny that you have to keep on doing works to obtain a right standing, you're cursed. If anyone says that guilt is remitted to every penitent sinner after the grace of justification has been received, and that the debt of eternal punishment is so blotted out that there remains no debt of temporal punishment to be discharged either in this world or in purgatory before the entrance into the kingdom of heaven can be opened, let him be anathema. If anyone says that the Catholic doctrine of justification set forth in this decree by this Holy Synod derogates in any way the glory of God or the merits of our Lord Jesus Christ, and not rather that the truth of our faith and the glory of God and of Jesus Christ are rendered more illustrious, let him be anathema.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is 500 years later, this is all standard Catholic doctrine right here. Now, most Catholics don't know this, don't know these things. The priest might if they've studied in seminary.
Well, when it comes to like the Latin Vulgate, I mean, your average Catholic of that time,
Nobody knew Latin.
they couldn't even read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, it wasn't until was it Vatican I in the 60s, or Vatican II is what where they said, okay, well, we'll allow you guys to read a Bible. But, it was kind of, almost forbidden to even read the Bible, or
Wow.
strongly discouraged.
Heaven forbid we let the lay people read the truth.
Trent also declared that the instrumental cause of justification, what is it that brings justification? There's got to be something we do, the instrument. If anybody declares that the instrumental cause of justification, that is the means by which it is attained, is not faith, but the sacrament of baptism. Trent also declared that the instrumental cause of justification is not faith, but baptism. How do you become a Christian? How do you get saved? You get baptized. The council also said that justification is forfeited when the believer commits a mortal sin, clearly making justification contingent on human works. So, according to Trent, justification is neither procured nor maintained through faith. Works are necessary both to begin and continue the process. And, if you do something bad enough, you lose everything and you got to start all over. Better not die before you start working on that one. That's a good way to keep people, giving money, Hey, man, come on. The reformers objected to Trent's pronouncements solely on biblical grounds. They filled many thick volumes with scriptural proofs against Rome's position. But since the Council of Trent's rulings were deemed infallible, and those who questioned them threatened by the church with eternal damnation, the breach between Rome and the reformers was irreparable. As we would say from California, irreconcilable differences. That's where it originated from, that statement for divorce, irreconcilable differences. More on the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The French Revolution, 1789, and its aftershocks. Louis XVI was a French king who did show a degree of tolerance toward Protestants, but he didn't do a good job of caring for the masses of the poor French people. During this period of great poverty, the king sought to increase his taxes by taxing both the nobility and the clergy, two groups who had historically been free from taxation. So,
Convenient.
this sounds like, this Mamdani is really something else, you know. It's like I mean, you know,
What's he up to?
well, you know, it's like oh, I'm just going to raise all these taxes, you know, like radically raise taxes.
He's gonna fall flat on his face.
He's gonna raise and then he's also today said he was gonna lay off / fire 5,000 policemen.
Yeah, you're going to cut 5,000 cops out of New York City. Let's see how that works out.
He also increased spending on diversity, DEI stuff.
When King Louis had the Protestant banker and government minister Necker, a man popular with both the bourgeoisie and the populace, deposed from his office, this move was met with a series of riots from the masses in Paris. It all culminated July 14th, 1789, when the people stormed the Bastille fortress that served as a prison for the king's enemies. None of you guys probably care anything about the Canadian trio Rush, rock group Rush. You guys ever listen to Rush?
Yeah.
Yeah, Rush rocks, man. So these guys are from Canada, you know, but you know they had a song on their Caress of Steel album called Bastille Day. It was a pretty cool song. There's no bread, let him eat cake. One of the demands made by the populace was that the king accept a new civil constitution in which all who held ecclesiastical office would swear allegiance to the new constitution or be deposed. This step was to try and eliminate the power that has historically been exercised by the ecclesiastical aristocracy in France. The net result in France was a divided church. Those who would swear loyalty got support from the state, but those who would not found their support among their own followers, although in practice they were often also persecuted because of their refusal to swear the loyalty oath. When all was said and done, one of the practical spiritual results of the French Revolution was the entrenchment of secularism as a ruling philosophy rather than submission to religion. Because, you know, by the time you get to 1789, this effectively is coming to the end of what we would call the Enlightenment. So, you know, generally speaking, you know, philosophers who follow, you know, trends of, worldview would kind of take the Enlightenment from roughly 1650 to the French Revolution. And this is when you had this, you know, severe casting off of any kind of authority. You know, when you look at the Enlightenment period, not Enlightenment, but when you look at the Renaissance in the, let's just say the 1400s into the early 1500s, you had the Catholic Church kind of losing its grasp on the European world, and that kind of opened the path for people to stand up to the Catholic Church, like Luther and others. And so the Reformation kind of grew out of that Renaissance era with people studying, reading, studying science, doing scientific studies, printing a Bible, reading the Bible. But that casting off of the Catholic Church, as you look at the 1600s and you look at this Enlightenment, it really began to be a casting off of any kind of divine authority, not just the Catholic Church, but any kind of, God's not going to tell me what to do. And so, you know, human reason, so the rationalism of that era, and this went into the 1800s too, but, the Enlightenment and rationalism where mankind establishes himself as, the really ultimate authority for what's true. And, the casting off of authority in the French Revolution was fairly significant, was quite significant.
So this might be tangential to what we're talking about here, but how does that relate to the more modern, the more common term, that current term of postmodernism?
Well, so if you look at kind of modernism, they'll usually kind of like identify that as coming, with like the Renaissance, and then from the time of the Reformation onward, with the Renaissance, so a study in human learning, and then all the way from, let's just say round numbers, late 1400s until really kind of like the late 20th century. And then as you look at the middle to late 20th century, they'd kind of say, well, that's kind of the end of the modern era and the rise of postmodernism. Now here's what I like to use as an illustration for this, and I may have done this already in this class, but if you were stuck on a desert island, your Gilligan's Island, who can solve your problem?
The professor.
The professor. He's a scientist. So that's like, you're talking about, like, let's say here, 1963. The professor, he's a scientist. He can solve everything. So there's a high confidence in, man's learning, science. If you were in I Dream of Jeannie, early 60s, who can fix your thinking? Dr. Bellows, the psychiatrist for NASA. Dr. Bellows, he's a psychiatrist. And if you look at movies from like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, those movies from that time period in America, it's like, oh, the psychiatrist, he knows what man is all about. I would say this, psychiatry, psychology is still, very widespread, but I don't think people today have that same kind of view of psychiatry and psychology like you saw, 100 years ago. Oh yeah, those guys, they really know the answers. What we say today is like, they're a quack, but anyhow, I'm going to send my kid to the quack because I don't want to mess with him, See what I'm saying? So postmodernism is kind of like saying, I don't think we have the answer, Matter of fact, maybe there is no answer. So you've got your answer, I've got my answer, you have your truth, I have my truth. That's kind of where postmodernism is kind of like going. It's becoming nihilistic, There is no answer. I want to see what this says right here about how did the Enlightenment have an influence on the French Revolution? The Enlightenment, roughly 17th to 18th centuries, provided the intellectual, philosophical, and moral framework for the French Revolution by promoting reason, individualism, and skepticism toward traditional authority. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu challenged the absolute monarchy and Catholic Church, advocating for natural rights, social contact, and popular sovereignty, which directly inspired the bourgeoisie to demand political change. Enlightenment thinkers questioned the divine right of kings, promoting the idea that government should be based on social contract between rulers and the ruled. Concepts from philosophers like John Locke regarding inalienable rights, life, liberty, and property directly influenced Voltaire's attacks on religious intolerance, and the advocacy for freedom of speech encouraged shift away from the church's control. So anyhow, those things that were happening 1600s up until the early, probably into the early 1800s, but French Revolution was kind of a big thing. When all was said and done, one of the practical spiritual results of the French Revolution was the entrenchment of secularism. And, France is pretty hard ground. If you're doing missions, that's slow, hard work. But it was not till the age of the encyclopedists, we'll wrap it up here in just a moment, of the era of the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century, end of the 1700s, that unbelief within the pale of Christian civilization, but outside of the church, found in a mighty new movement of secularism and anti-clericalism a convenient ambush from which to launch its attack against the citadels of the faith. Let's see. All right. Questions?
That's kind of what we get for,
by this time, right, the church was used to exercise, authority, and, so it was kind of just a means of exerting power anyway, for a lot of folks.
Yeah. You guys want to go for a few more minutes? Or do you want to stop right now? If we go for a few more minutes, I'd say 15 more minutes.
Stopping,
Huh?
stopping point.
Yeah, that's okay. All right, so yeah, we'll stop right here on 269. But I don't know. Any kind of thoughts here? I mean, if there's some kind of thought that we have been looking at.
Seems like it's partially the church's fault that the people became secular because of the power that they put the people under. Instead of ministering to them, they treated them as, like somebody would treat property.
Well, okay, so now if we look here at, let's say, what happened, let's say in the French Revolution, which is kind of seen as being, pretty significant turning point. By that time, 1789, if we pin the Reformation in the 1500s, 1500s, 1600s, up into 1789, you've got, 250, almost 300 years of Christianity, Protestantism. Let's say 250 years of Protestantism, rising up in the continent and in England, and as we've seen already, in France, there were some massacres of Christians in France. Like the Huguenots, for example, mass massacres, and that country probably has paid a big price for, the way that they massacred true believers. So, when we look at kind of like, what's happening in our own country right now, really significant, and I would say, I think growing hatred of biblical Christianity. And, as you look at the growing hatred of Christianity, and then, the growing secularism that is overtaking the political structures, educational structures, we're probably kind of headed in, similar direction of just having, a really, really ripe godlessness overtaking our society, And that also becomes really violent and vile. Think about, I don't know, when you look at some of these riots and all these protesting and things like that, and you look at some of the people that are, like part of these movements, like this, guy the other day, another transsexual, that committed this big mass murder in, where was it?
The one in the skating rink?
Well, the skating rink, that was
Yeah.
yeah, there was a couple people shot, and then, but what days before that, up in Canada, you had a bigger shooting at a school, right?
Yeah, and that was another transsexual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you look and you say, man, what is going on here? And, I don't know, when these videos pop up from, I don't know, like Facebook, news things pop up, and you get these people that are out there protesting in the streets here, man, they're just like ugly, vicious people.
Very emotional, very angry, and, yeah.
Yeah.
Depressed.
Yeah.
Let's just see. Eric Dane, what is that? What a relative of mine? You guys know who that is? I don't know who
Yeah.
Eric Dane is.
I've seen some.
What is he?
He was on The Ship, a TNT TV show.
Huh.
He was on a recent show that was about a special cop force that was taking care of guys. He was an X-Man, or not, he was a mutant in one of the X-Men.
Mm.
Yeah, he was the one that divided himself up in the several.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Second one, I think. No, third one. He was in the third one. Last stand.
Yeah, you know, I think we have some, definitely some, serious, problems in, Western American Christianity. But when you compare, what is here, probably pretty decent compared to a lot of, the last 2,000 years. And I've been in quite a few places, other countries teaching, and not so bad compared to what you find in other parts of the world. I mean, the Christianity in Russia, Ukraine, even the good stuff was pretty weak. France, man, it's like, that's a dry, barren world. Germany has been pretty dry and barren. Italy is all Catholic, basically. I don't know, where, I mean, I guess the church in China, which is supposedly, pretty big in terms of the underground church. I don't know, there's guesses that maybe as many as 20% of the population are Christians in an underground level. Sonny, do you have any thoughts about knowledge of any of that, like in mainland China or even Taiwan?
No, I know that Taiwan, which I'm more familiar with, is very, very secular.
Very what?
Very, very, very secular.
Uh-huh.
Taiwan is. They're the for example, like the LGBT alphabet soup movement is they're like the capital of
Really?
that for Asia.
Even worse than Thailand?
Yeah, Taiwan.
I said Thailand.
Yeah, Taiwan. Yeah, Taiwan
And-
is. Yeah, is. I don't know about Thailand, but it is
Bangkok,
pretty bad
Thailand.
in Taiwan.
So anyhow, I don't know, where would you look if you went outside of the United States? Where would you look and say, oh yeah, that country's got some pretty, good evangelical presence?
I've heard South Korea is very right.
Yeah, I've got a number of Korean friends, especially from, LA, and they speak pretty strongly against, it's a heavy prosperity gospel,
Oh, is that right?
very saturated with prosperity gospel. Now, there may be, I don't know how strong, let's say, good evangelicalism, no doubt it's there, but there's a really, really heavy prosperity gospel kind of presence there. And, you go into Africa, really, really big, heavy, charismatic prosperity gospel in Africa. So, as many problems as we have, we're still probably doing better than the average bear as far as American Christian presence.
So what happens when a North Korean watches a South Korean televangelist?
Gee.
Probably get shot by, what's his face, Kim.
Yeah.
He likes blowing people up with anti-aircraft.
Watch the
guns.
movie 1984, Lord, thank you for our time here to look at your work throughout the ages. It does definitely remind us of our need for your grace, the blood of Christ. We thank you for loving us and giving us Christ. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
I was watching a video where they were talking about North Korea, and they